The effects of Hurricane Harvey will be around for months, if not years to come. The storm brought an unprecedented amount of rain to southeastern Texas. Residents are without water and electricity. Some have lost their homes or are in danger of losing their homes. Gina McCarthy, former EPA administrator, joins me to talk about the environmental impact of Harvey. Gina, thanks for being with us.
It's great to be here, Dana. Thank you.
Let me start with just the idea of the storms. Is this area seeing stronger storms than what they saw before?
Oh, they are seeing this. This one is an extreme weather event, and one that many of the chemical and refinery industries are finding extraordinarily hard to deal with, as you can see on the ground today. And I expect you'll see more. We've had releases of millions of tons of pollutants, and we've had challenges, particularly at the Acoma plant, where people have seen the fires and what most of us would think of as explosions. So we have immediate challenges that folks are going to face, but we also have longer term challenges, and some of it is just essential water and wastewater infrastructure challenges that are going to have to be addressed, and that make those floodwaters not just a danger for drowning and damage, but also for our public health.
Why, and you mentioned that stronger storms in this area, why are there stronger storms in this area?
Well, I think, as we all know, the climate is changing, and we have been telling people that it's time to adapt to that change. We are seeing more intense storms as a result of climate change, and if we don't take action, we're going to see even more intense and frequent storms. So we've had at EPA during the prior administration a very active effort to work with communities to adapt to this changing climate. We also had a new rule that we published to deal with chemical industries just like this, to make sure that they were better prepared for explosions like this, and sharing information with their local community so that you could address the kind of challenges we're seeing today. But that rule was put on hold by this administration in June for nearly 2 years because they were worried that they needed to look at the business impacts. Well, we're seeing the business impacts today, and we're seeing the public health challenges today. If you don't provide leadership to get information and to work with industry to protect the public, our water, our drinking water, and our air quality.
I'm not certain if this is what you're referring to, the federal flood risk mitigation standard. Is that's what you mean? And this, for people that don't know, that aren't aware, it required public infrastructure projects that received taxpayer dollars to do more planning for floods. And this was rolled back, or put on hold, I should say, by the Trump administration. Why was that so important in your mind?
Actually, I was referring to something else, but that is obviously important because you need to deal with the changing reality that we are in and take into consideration the information that science is telling us so that you can technically design the way you're supposed to and in a way that protects people. I was referring to the chemical safety rule that the prior administration at EPA, under my watch, put forward because we had learned a lesson from West Texas years ago when we had 11 emergency responders that went to a fire at a chemical facility and they lost their lives. And that was because the industry wasn't prepared and the community didn't have the information it needed to respond in a way that kept their responders safe and effectively managed that challenge. And we worked with industry to get a rule done so that we could work and prepare and get information. And as soon as this administration came in, they listened to industry or heard from somebody and said, you know, we really need to look at this. So let's put off gathering the very information that will allow our communities to protect themselves for another few years while we rethink it.
You know, you mentioned climate change before. I was reading an op-ed the other day that talked about just sort of a different factor, the idea that in an area like Houston that's grown so quickly, the way that it's grown with so much urban sprawl, areas that were prairies that could soak up rainwaters like this no longer can do so. Is this a concern for other cities as well and in Houston?
Well, we saw that in Hurricane Katrina. We saw the wetlands that had been destroyed and damaged, which really buffer storms for these areas. But yes, we're seeing some significant challenges, and many mayors are standing up right now and saying, you know, we need to adapt to that challenge. We need to understand that these extreme weather events aren't just one-offs. They're actually what our present day has to expect and what is going to get worse in the future. So they've been looking at ways in which they can buffer themselves, adapt their treatment systems, work with their industries so they can expect events like this in the future and be fully prepared to continue to be safe and have their community function well. These are real challenges that we need to face. And the kind of anti-regulatory and climate denial, kind of rhetoric that we've been seeing really needs to step aside, and real leadership we need at the federal level so that we can once again address the challenges that are being faced, not just immediately with the information we need to keep our community safe, but in the long term work with the international effort to address climate so these issues don't get more frequent, these storms don't get more intense, and we simply lose our ability to adapt and protect ourselves.
One federal move we saw recently, I believe it was just within the last day, the EPA issued waivers so that certain states could ignore some of the clean air requirements for gas so that you would have gas in the system. This is nothing unique, though.
No, it's not. There has been a process in place where DOE and EPA and the emergency management agencies work together to make sure that we keep energy flowing. We know that energy is necessary in order to make sure that in the event of a storm like that, there are adjustments made that are temporary is a very reasonable and appropriate step to take for communities that are impacted if they don't get the flow of energy.
You mentioned the chemical industry. Obviously, this is the gas industry. What is the impact on both of those industries going forward now with just seeing the beginning of what Harvey has left behind?
Well, we have to see what the assessment is long term. I think the damage that we're seeing here, you'll catch up with what's already happened, but it will continue to be a significant challenge for the country as a whole. We are talking about a very large price tag and a very significant challenge, I think, for a while to get the refineries back up and running. So this isn't a week or 2 weeks. It's a number of years and billions of dollars.
And in the coming days, not gas, not the chemical fire, which they seem at least some of that area is maybe not as heavily populated. What's your biggest concern for people there in Texas environmentally right now?
Well, I just want to make sure that they're paying attention to what we know. In other words, when you have a facility like this that's putting their hand up and saying you better evacuate, people need to pay attention. But one of my biggest concerns is the flood water and the contamination that's already happened. We have more than a dozen, if not dozens, of Superfund sites in Texas alone and in the Houston area. And those Superfund sites will now be spread broader as they've been flooded out. And there are going to be communities at risk. People's homes will be risky places to be, so don't go back unless someone tells you it's okay to do that. We all have chemicals in our basements. We'll all have real challenges if people don't listen and deal with these things in a sequential and reasonable way. And it's going to be hard. And I think the biggest challenge we might have immediately is the fact that we have water contamination of drinking water supplies. People need to rely on bottled water, but the infrastructure itself is likely to be damaged. And when you have water and wastewater mixing together, you have real chances of disease and outbreaks that we need to address and make sure that people avoid. We can do it, but people need to listen and pay attention, and we all need to respond together.
Some patience, and as you said, this is not a problem for days, this is months and years to come. Gina McCarthy, former EPA administrator, thank you so much for the insight.
Thanks.